Hey everybody, hope you're well. Waiting on Ravioni, I believe, to join and a few others. So Stay tuned. We'll start as soon as he arrives.
Rabbi Yoni says he'll be right there. I apologize for the delay.
Thanks for your patience, everyone. The beautiful day outside. Has anyone been able to get out? Anybody able to get out for a walk? I encourage it. I rode my bike to shul. Sorry, I'm just stalling. Sherry, welcome. Yoni's going to be here in a moment. Rabbinic stalling. It's one of the key classes.
I will just mute myself.
Here, Yoni's here. Great. Okay. So welcome everyone. And I want to welcome Rabbi Yoni Rosensweig, who I think is here. See his name on the screen. I'm assuming he's connecting. There he is. Okay, it's really, really good to see everybody here. And we have a tremendous opportunity today to learn as part of our ongoing series, Torah from Israel, to learn from Rabbi Yoni Rosensweig. Rabbi Yoni actually was in the shul, you may remember. When was that? Was that pre-COVID, Rabbi Yoni? 4 years ago?
I don't remember.
I don't remember either. He was in Skokie Valley and gave a very important shiur on a topic which he teaches about a lot, which is halacha and mental health. Rabbi Yoni is really, I would say, the leading rabbinic expert right now in halacha and mental health. He's published a very important sefer, which I have in my office, which is a fantastic and needed resource on halacha and mental health, and he lectures and engages and gives guidance, psak and guidance to probably hundreds of people across the world in our community who are seeking that guidance. And it's a tremendous service he does for the Jewish people. And I personally am incredibly grateful for his work, and I've learned so much from it. It's been very useful and very important in my own rabbinate. So I'm grateful to him for that. And in addition to that amazing work, he's also the rabbi of Netzach Menashe community in Beit Shemesh. He was the Rosh Kollel of the Mizrahi community in Melbourne in 2006, 2009. He was at Hamivtar. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva Shvut Israel in Efrat, and also teaches currently at Midrashet Lindenbaum. He's a Talmid Chacham. He is sensitive and thoughtful. His posts during this current crisis have been required reading, I would say, for anybody who wants to follow what's going on and think about it from a halachic, spiritual, mental health, political. He's able to engage a lot of important things together, and just a really important voice in our community. And it's wonderful and a great zechut to have you with us to share, your experiences about what's going on and your Torah. And we are here to listen to you, to support you, give chizuk to you, learn from you. And we are grateful to you for taking this time to be with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. Sorry, before I begin, if you could just remind me what our time framework is?
About an hour, 45 minutes, hour. Yeah.
45 minutes. Okay, fine. Okay. All right. Well, like I said, thank you very much. And yeah, I can't even place when I was wherever I like. It seems like everything before October 7th is just like so. Everyone's so out of whack, and it seems like it was so long ago. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy that I'm able to get back a little bit into things and talk here and other places, and I think that everybody is following the situation in Israel, obviously, and I know that you all have family or friends or someone who's involved. I always say that Israel is it's a very small country, and when 1,400 people get killed and several hundred become hostages, and X amount of people are also wounded, it touches everyone in Israel, certainly. But what's amazing to me that even across the world, it's almost impossible for a person not to know someone, which is pretty amazing. How interconnected the Jewish world is, and we're all affected by it, and it really has ramifications for everybody. So anyway, here I am, and I'm happy to have the ability and the opportunity to engage about the situation. I think what I want to say right off the bat that I'm happy to answer questions that people have or comments that people may have, and feel free to write those in the chat or whatever it is. Maybe I'll even leave some time at the end if people want to say something. But what I want to share with you today,
I'm gonna do the tables again.
Yeah, I'm just gonna add some more stuff.
Okay.
we should just mute whoever.
Well, and make sure your phones are muted, everybody.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. Yeah. So what I really want to do today is maybe to share a little bit about my experience as a rabbi during this time. Rav Ari mentioned both halachic and spiritual challenges, and I'd like to talk a little bit about those things, and connect them to my work also about mental health, and see where we go from there. So rabbis generally get asked many different kinds of questions, but I think if you ask any rabbi, you can ask your rabbi, Rav Ari, you'll find that on a regular day, so to speak, not during wartime, a rabbi probably gets asked a lot of the same sorts of questions. They will get asked the same sorts of questions regarding kashrus, regarding Shabbos, regarding simchas, regarding avelos, regarding this and that and the other. You'll get a lot of the same kinds of questions. And of course, once in a while, a rabbi will get a unique question, something that they haven't encountered, before ever or in a while. And then they'll have to, of course, tackle that. Sometimes that means that they'll do some learning and they'll do some thinking on their own, or they'll ask, an authority that is greater than themselves, to figure that out. The difference is with wartime, what I'm finding now more than any other period really in my life, is that I'm getting asked not only in terms of the volume, the amount of questions that I'm getting asked, but also in terms of the quality. In other words, the quality of questions is such that it's the kind of question that you don't get asked every single day. So I'm getting asked, and many rabbis, not just, are getting asked not just a lot of questions, but a lot of new questions that they have never encountered before and never really had to think through. And that brings us to a place where we really need to consider a lot of different facets and ideas that shape really our Judaism and shape the way we think about the world. And I want to give some examples today in order to explain to you what I mean by all those things. Okay, so that's where we're going to come up. I think we still need people to mute their things. Anyway,
Rabbi Yoni, you can make me admin. I'll mute everybody.
We're good.
Remind me who they are.
Friends, I'm not an admin. David, whoever David is, please mute yourself. And Rabbi Yoni, if you can make me an admin, I know she's driving. If you can make me an admin, I will mute everybody.
Oh, there we go. Okay, I think David just did it. Anyway, so yeah, I'd like to share with you some of the things that have come up over the time, and how that affects not just the specific halachic question, but how it affects the way we think about this time and about this war, and about a few other things as well. So let me start with a question that I've been asked several times, okay, already, which has to do with burial. Okay, generally, the halacha is that we bury Jews in Jewish cemeteries, and we bury non-Jews in different cemeteries, right? And we try to have separate cemeteries. And that's important from a halachic perspective. It's mentioned in the Gemara, it's mentioned in the halacha many, many times. So that seems obvious. But a few years back, there were some questions that started cropping up about the burial of non-Jewish soldiers in the IDF, because, as you know, not everybody who makes Aliyah is Jewish, due to certain, obviously the legal situation is complicated in that sense. And of course, many of them are also, they were born there, Druze, serve in the IDF, and Bedouins serve in the IDF, et cetera, et cetera. And there were some questions about, where, assuming that one wanted to bury them in a military cemetery, whether that was okay or not okay. And there was some discussion, some robust discussion about that at the time. What we have today was a different kind of discussion, because what we had as a result of October 7th was a discussion about the burial, not just of military personnel that are not Jewish, but also just civilians, right? Because the enemy, right, the Hamas came into Israel and they indiscriminately killed anyone that they encountered, whether Jewish or not Jewish. It did not matter to them. And as a result of that, right, there were some questions about burial. And here we are faced with a very, from a halachic, and it's tragic from a human perspective, but from a halachic perspective, it's a fascinating situation, because what we have here, when we had soldiers dying, they were dying al Kiddush Hashem. They were dying for the country, they were dying for the state, and you could definitely make the case that they were Chasidei Umot Ha'olam, that they were people who had thrown their lot in, with the Jewish people, and that as such, there was room within the halacha to allow their burial even within a Jewish cemetery. And yes, there were definitely rabbis, including my Rebbe, Rabbi Rabinovich Zatzal, who paskin so, that it would be a Chil Hashem, it would be a desecration of God's name, to separate between blood and blood, to basically say that someone who is not Jewish should be buried, so to speak, separately. If they want to be buried side by side, with their unit, with the soldiers that they died, with defending the country, there would be a Kiddush Hashem, would be a sanctification of God's name, in fact. To do so would be the right thing, to bury them within a Jewish cemetery. But here, right, we had civilians who were killed, and the question once again was raised. Now I can tell you that in practice, right, what the Chevra Kadisha here decided to do was to bury them separately. Was to bury these individuals in a separate place and not in a Jewish cemetery, not, and some of them want to be buried separately. It's also some of them are not interested. But I must say that I'm not so sure that that was the right answer halachically. If someone dies, right, lives and dies, in a sense, in a terror attack, in a sense, for the ideal of this country, it raises many interesting questions about how we, as a country, see ourselves relating to the non-Jews that live within that country, right? So it's not just a technical question; it's much more than that. There's a heavy question here that really relates to the entire structure of this country and what we would like to see. And if we have an alliance, and I think that we all understand, also with America, of course, but not just, that if we have an alliance that is made between Jews and non-Jews in order to combat evil, in order to create good, in order to move forwards with those ideals that we think that are proper, then we cannot, once again, it is not proper, it is not appropriate probably to separate, ben dam le dam, between blood and blood, and to say that anyone who is contributing here, who sees his life here, who is willing to die, basically, for those ideals, that they should be separated. Now, of course, there are ways to do it in a way that is also halachically correct. And I'm not trying to say that, that we, should completely forget about the idea of a Jewish cemetery here in Israel. That is not the point. But it does bring to the fore a lot of important questions, about what it means to live in Israel. Because living in Israel for us, right, was always, we live in this country, it's our country, and that's that. But really what we're seeing now is that there's a lot of uncertainty that could suddenly, wake in a moment and throw a spanner into the works. And so when we think about those relationships that we have with the non-Jews who live in this country, who love this country, who find this country dear to them, right? Then we need to think about what Chazal, what the rabbi said in Masechet Gittin, that if you have a city that is mixed between Jews and non-Jews, that the Jews should also be involved in the burial of the non-Jews. They should take part in that. They should make sure that that burial is done bechavod, with dignity. They should make sure that those people get their last rites, whatever they need. And once again, doesn't mean you have to exactly bury side. We can talk about the details, but really it's about the point, the central point that comes out of this, which is, what does it mean for a person to decide to live in Israel? What does that mean for an individual to throw in their lot with the Jewish community, with the Jewish people? That is something which, we tend to, here in Israel, certainly, we tend to push aside, right? There was the Chok HaLe'om, right? The law that was passed, in the Knesset regarding Israel being the home of the Jewish people. I was very much for that law. I still am, right? But, we can see from the kinds of sacrifices that non-Jews make for this country, that perhaps that law is lacking in some way, missing certain aspects in some way. I still think that the country is the home of the Jewish people. I still think it should be recognized as such and defined as such, but it doesn't mean that we can't amend certain things, within the law, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't rethink, as a result of some of these halachic questions, what it means to have a connection with non-Jews within a Jewish state, which is I think a question that we, once again, many times don't think about, but I think that it really comes to the fore out of all this. So that's one example of a question that has come up, and its possible ramifications. A second question that people ask has to do with Shabbos, and it also affects other areas, but let me try to start off with Shabbos, okay? So when it comes to Shabbat, many soldiers will ask whether or not they can go home for Shabbos, or whether or not, they can go home on Shabbos, or whether or not they can travel on Shabbat back to their units. Okay, so I assume that anyone here, without me even telling you what the answer is, right? If you were asked by someone who has to fight in Gaza, right, and he says, "Oh, they let me off on Friday, but they say I have to go back on Shabbos," I assume you would say, "Fine, you have to go back on Shabbos. You have to go back. You're fighting. You're doing what you need to do." Sure, that's one sort of question and one sort of dilemma. But there are more complicated dilemmas. For example, what happens if a person says, not that they're let go on Shabbos, or let go Friday, they let go on Shabbos, right? So now they have to travel on Shabbat to go home, not to go back to the fighting. To go back to the fighting is obviously pikuach nefesh, it's obviously life-threatening. But soldiers who ask, "Oh, can I go home on Shabbat in order to see my wife, to see my kids, to see my family? Would that be acceptable or unacceptable?" Okay, one sort of question. Now a more complicated question. Let's say it's not a fighter. Let's say it's not a warrior. Let's say it's not someone who's in a combat unit. Let's say it's someone who is doing hasbara, who's doing PR. There's a whole unit, that's in the army that's involved in, interviewing and working online to make sure that Israel is properly represented, to fight back against the lies, they're told about Israel, et cetera, et cetera. That unit during wartime works 24/7, right? So a person asked me today, called me up and asked me, he said, "I'm being called back to my unit on Shabbat." To do that, he's not going to be in the combat unit. He's being called on Shabbat back to his unit to get on the computer, and to do the work that he needs to do in terms of fighting the PR war, so to speak, online. Can he do that, or can't he do that, right? Can he go back on Shabbat if he needs to back home when his shift is done? In that case, his shift was not done, but on Shabbat it will be done Motzei Shabbos. But let's say if he asked, could he go back Motzei Shabbos, would that be allowed, right? There are people who ask me who run volunteer organizations, so there's it's like a hotline in a sense. Some people call in, they say this person needs this person needs that. They're talking about communities that were displaced. They're talking about the soldiers, right? Can they work on Shabbat? Right? What of all of this is considered pikuach nefesh, considered life-threatening? What of all of this is considered maybe something between life-threatening and routine? And what of this should be just not allowed, right? How do we make those decisions? So all these are significant halachic questions, and each one, of course, needs to be identified and developed in and of itself. However, without going into, once again, each and every question and answering according to all the details of halacha, what we see here is on a general level, from a bird's eye view, is actually a very important question. What does a war look like? Meaning, who's in the war? Who's part of a war? Back in the day, before like 500, 1,000, 50, 2,000, in the time of the Torah, right? A war was the warriors. The warriors used to go and they used to fight. Now, it's true that there are two sources that talk about those who stay behind, who guard, the machaneh, guard the camp, right? And the spoils are divided 50-50 between the warriors and those who guard the camp. So you see that the people who are in the camp, they are considered to be, in a sense, part of the war effort. But today it's much more pronounced than back then. The idea that there is, as they say in Hebrew, chazit and oref. Chazit is the front and oref is the rear, right? The idea that there is a connection between the chazit and the oref, between the front and the rear, is very well established, especially in Israel, which once again is a small country. I assume that when the U.S. Sends troops, to, as they have in the past, right, to Vietnam or to Afghanistan or to Iraq or to wherever it is. So they're on foreign soil. They're in another country. But the rear, while they worry about those in the front, are not as affected. But in Israel, it's not like that. Because it's a small country, one might say that the entire country is at war. I mean, certainly that's true when we're being bombarded by rockets, et cetera, et cetera. But even without that, the supply chains, the connections, all the little things, right, that help a person feel like they are okay like they can do this war, that they can fight this war. A lot of that has to do with people in the rear, and therefore, because we have army bases all over the country, right? As you well know. So therefore, it's embedded, within the community to a large extent. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it, as you well know, once again, is that war has political and international implications, right? And therefore, if you secure, for example, would I say that Netanyahu should be able to make as many calls, to Biden on Shabbos as he needs to? Of course, I would say that. Why would I say that? Because securing international support for what Israel is doing is part of the war effort. It's pivotal. Would I say the same thing about Hasbara, about Jewish, people, about the IDF, speaking on behalf of the Jewish state and fighting off, of course I would say that same thing. Yes, I would say the same thing. That fighting detractors, in an organized fashion, of course, and in whatever is necessary. I wouldn't say every single person can just get on the computer. But yes, I would say that the IDF doing what it does best in a professional manner, and in order to make sure that the fighting can continue in a safe way, yes, I would say that that's also definitely part of the war effort and necessary for the war effort. And we see the effect, that this has. And by the way, has an effect also worldwide, as we know, because Jews are targeted worldwide when there's a war in Israel, and that is important as well. So we need to defend Jews everywhere, and this is once again of great significance. So all this, right, I mentioned as a second question, it has to do with the nature of war. Some of these questions, really bring to light many of the new circumstances, shall we say, that we find ourselves in this modern period. Okay, and this is another example of that. The last example, halachic example that I'll give, and then I'll move on to a different kind of example. But the last halachic example that I'll give has to do with, I would say, still the connection between the front and the rear, but here not in terms of the definition of war, but in terms of the necessity of the resilience of the rear in order to be able to persist and to be able to survive through wartime. I was asked early on, one of the first questions that I got asked was that if a man goes home and his wife is in nida, meaning that they cannot touch halachically, can't you give him a hug? Right? And I've been asked this countless times since then. Right? If a soldier goes home and he hasn't been home in 3 weeks or whatever it is, and he's going to go back right after, 24, 48 hours, he'll have to go back. Can he give a hug, receive a hug from his wife? Is that acceptable, even though the halacha seems to forbid it? And here we get a little bit closer to the issues that I talk about a lot, which are mental health. And I think we understand a lot more about mental health today. I think we understand more about resilience. I think we understand a lot more about the connections that there are between mind and body. And I think that all those things are very, very important, that they play into an answer, with regards to such issues. So the Rambam, right, he writes that when a person goes out to war, he must put his family out of his mind, and he must put his children out of his mind and his house out of his mind, and he must be focused on the war. So you might say, a person shouldn't even go home, right? If they let him out for like 24 hours or whatever it is, why should he see family? He has to put everything out of his mind. But we have to remember what the world was like during the Rambam's time, and certainly before the Rambam's time. When a person went out to war, he wasn't in touch with his family. There was no way to be in touch with your family. You went out and you put everything out of your mind, right? You have to focus on the war. That was how it was, right? Those were the realities of old. But today, I'm in touch with my family several times a day, as I'm sure all of you are, right? Even if you're out of the house, you pick up the phone, you call people, you text, you WhatsApp, you find out what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. People are used to being in touch. And actually not being in touch might make a person less focused and more on edge and more anxious. The reality that we deal with today is much different. So therefore, what really, if I'm trying to achieve the same goal that the Rambam is trying to achieve, which is that the person is focused on the war, is able to to leave the house behind and do what he needs to do, et cetera, then I would say it's the opposite. He needs once in a while to be in touch because that's what he's used to. That's the routine that he's used to. He needs to be in touch once in a while with family. He needs to get a message once in a while over to them, or they should get a message to him. And yes, if he's able to leave to go home, I think that could be immensely important to his mental health and to his ability to function throughout the war. So all these things are very, very important for functionality. And once again, we know this today. We know this much more than they knew it back in the day. We know the effects that mental health has on physical health, that a good balanced individual has, has a better chance of doing what he needs to do in a war, in a tight situation, in an anxious situation. All that is quite obvious. So all these questions, I hope you understand, right? All these questions, all this was to demonstrate how, I don't know if simple, hard questions. These are not simple, they're hard questions, but they all bring to the fore new ideas, new concepts, new things that we need to think about. And even if you would decide differently than me on those halachic questions, which totally fine, I have no problem with it. It says something about your thought process, right? I don't mind how people paskin, meaning I paskin the way I think, and people would paskin differently than me. That's fine, yeah. But either way, no matter how you look at it, right, you're making a decision, a significant decision about some really, really important issues that are really, really fundamental to the way that we think about this nation, about our world, about our society, and that is, that is why it's so hard, I would say, to get a handle on things these days. But besides halachic questions, I also get machshavik questions. I also get philosophical and theological questions, and emotional questions, of course, that people have. People want to know why this is happening. People want to know how we're supposed to relate, to these difficult times. People want to know, how they're supposed to believe in God, after something like this. How could bad things happen to such good people? How is it that right after Yom Kippur, when we prayed and we did tshuva and we asked for mechila, that all this happened? These are difficult questions, that I am asked. And even if you've heard 1,000 shiurim, 1,000 lectures, about tzaddik v'rala, rasha v'tovla, about why good things happen to bad people and vice versa, you still don't know how to answer when a specific instance comes your way, such as this, right? Because we know all the big answers, we know all the classic responses. It doesn't make it easier for us to be able to answer a specific individual, in pain in that moment, who has lost someone. And finding meaning can be tricky, with such things. So what do I say to people, right? When they ask me these questions. So for me, the first thing that I say is that, of course, we don't know the answer, right? I mean, obviously, such big questions, right? I mean, we are about almost 80 years, from the Holocaust, and we're never going to know the answer to why those things happen. Certainly, we wouldn't have been able to answer, like a year after, right? And we are just like a few weeks after such a terrible, terrible tragedy. So obviously, our perspective is lacking, and from a spiritual perspective, it's hard to know for sure, why anything happened. But I always tell people that the most important thing that they can do is not think about why God did it and what's the cause, but rather they should look into themselves and see what it means to them and what they can do. And when people say, what do you mean by that? So I say, look, the rabbis, our rabbis, Chazal and the Gemara, were some of the most self-aware individuals that I have ever encountered. And I give the classic example of Chorban Habayit, of the destruction of the temple. In the destruction of the second temple, the rabbis write, Akamtza uvar kamtza charuv Yerushalayim. They say Yerushalayim was destroyed because of Kamtza uvar kamtza. And I think you all know the story. It's quite famous, where there was a fellow who invited Kamtza, who he loved, and the messenger got the name wrong and invited Bar Kamtza. And this Bar Kamtza comes to the meal, and the fellow says, I didn't invite you. And he wants to get rid of this guy. And the guy says, I'll pay for whatever I eat. I'll pay for half the meal. I'll pay for the whole meal. He refuses for any sort of compromise. And eventually, he kicks him out. Now, and here is the interesting point. Bar Kamtza goes and he tells on this individual and on the Jews in general, he tells on them to the Roman emperor. But the reasoning given is not because he was kicked out. The reasoning given is that there were rabbis sitting at the meal and they said nothing. There were rabbis sitting at that meal. They saw what was happening. They did not protest. They said nothing. They let it happen. That was what Bar Kamtza felt was so wrong about the scenario. What we see here, to me, is unbelievable. If I asked any historian why the temple was destroyed, they would not tell me the story of Kamtza Bar Kamtza. They would give me geopolitical reasons, historical story. They would explain the situation in Rome at the time and the situation in Israel at the time. And at the end of the day, they would blame the Romans. At the end of the day, they would say the Romans were the ones who came and destroyed the temple for whatever reasons they had. They certainly would not blame Kamtza and Bar Kamtza, some random story that every child, going through school knows because we tell it so often. But let's be honest. I mean, it comes out of nowhere, right? That story is like, what is that story? Yeah, it's not your classic story of like how the temple was destroyed. But what the rabbis are doing here, to me, is unbelievable. They are blaming themselves. That's what they're doing in that story. They're basically coming and saying, why was Jerusalem destroyed? It was destroyed because of us. We sat at that meal and we did not protest. We sat at that event, but we said nothing. We were there, but we weren't there. We didn't do what we were supposed to do. We didn't act properly. And that, to me, is an amazing act for the person, right, whose city was destroyed, whose country was decimated, by the Romans, to come and say, you know what? I'm not going to play the victim here. I'm not going to say, oh, the Romans are terrible. They did everything. I'm going to look inside myself and I'm going to say, hey, what did I do? Where am I in all of this? How can I be better? Right? You know how we always say that the second temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, because of hatred? Right? We always say that. Right? It's a classic line. I don't know if you know where that line comes from. It doesn't come from Kamtza Bar Kamtza. It comes from the Gemara in Yoma Daf Tet, 9a. What does the Gemara there say? The Gemara there says that the first temple, we know why it was destroyed. Because the prophets say why it was destroyed. It was destroyed because of the three cardinal sins: murder, incense, and idol worship. And the prophets say that all three of those things existed at the time of the first temple. What's the catch? The catch is that in the time of the second temple, the rabbis were around, and they knew that those things didn't exist. They saw what was happening. So the Gemara in Yoma says, but we don't have those things. If that's the reason why the temple was destroyed, we get it. It makes sense. Three cardinal sins, 100%. Yeah, but we know that didn't exist. There was no widespread murder or incense or idol worship during the second temple. So why? Why was it destroyed? And the rabbis say, sinat chinam. What's amazing to me about that answer, about that response, is once again that the rabbis are not looking for the usual suspects. Right? Many rabbis, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions against anyone specific, many rabbis see what they want to see. In other words, people will say, why did this atrocious thing happen? And they'll say, oh, this atrocious thing happened because of the people don't learn enough Torah. So did you think people did learn enough Torah before? If you did, then this event did not teach you anything. That's what you're saying. You're saying, I thought this before. Aha, I was right. Okay. But if you really think that an event of this magnitude is here to teach you something, but the thing that it came to teach you, you already thought before, then it's taught you nothing. If all you've learned is what you already knew, which is that you thought people weren't learning enough Torah, or people weren't davening with enough kavanah, or whatever it is that you think that the reason was, right? Then if that's something that you thought before, then this event was, so to speak, wasted on you because you learned nothing new. I think that what the rabbis, when they say sinat chinam, what they're saying is, we want to learn something new. So we're not saying it's the 3 cardinal sins; those didn't exist. So then, what could it be? What could it be? Let's dig deeper. Let's dig deeper. Let's see what it could have been. What did we do wrong? How did we mess this up? And once again, no one denies, those rabbis wouldn't deny either, that it was the Romans who eventually came and destroyed the Mikdash. Fine. But when I blame other people, I don't learn anything. And all I can do is learn something and try to learn something. And once again, I want to make sure it's clear. When I say learn something, I don't mean that it's the cause. Okay? There's a very big difference between saying that the Holocaust happened in order to create the state of Israel, which I don't like that sentence at all, because it implies that God needed to kill 6 million Jews in order to create the state, when I pretty much believe that God could have done it in many, many different ways, and that was not necessary. So I can't say that there's a causal relationship between the two. But there's a difference in saying that and saying, I don't know why the Holocaust happened, but I definitely can learn from it that there is a need for a home for the Jewish people. They're not saying there's a causation. One caused the other. One needed to happen. A happened so that B would happen. But I can say that because since A happened, I am looking at A and learning that B needs to happen. That's different. That's not causation. It's learning a lesson from what occurred. Do I think that we need to learn lessons from what occurred? I do. But I'm not a big chassid. I don't really like, the big lessons. When people try to teach other people lessons, when they try to, beat on someone else's chest. I'm more of a fan of personal lessons, small lessons, where a person looks at himself, and he says, okay, the reality here is not good. The reality that we are faced with is negative. How can I make that reality more positive? What can I do to better myself and better my surroundings? How can I learn from this? Something. It doesn't mean you're to blame if you're learning something. It just means that there's no causation. I'm not saying this happened because. No. I don't know why this happened. But I do know that we can all look at this. When we see evil spreading throughout the world, then we need to think for ourselves, wait, what can I do to combat evil? What can I do to learn from this situation in order to make myself and my surroundings better? That is what I think that we need to do. It reminds me of an idea that my Rebbe, Rabbi Yoni Rosensweig, and I also heard it from Rabbi Sachs, once in a very powerful 2 or 3 minute video. You can look it up online, when he was asked about why bad things happen to good people, or why can we not understand evil? Why is it hidden from us? And Rabbi Sachs said, and also my Rebbe, Rabbi Zatzal, they said, it's impossible to know why bad things happen, but the reason that God hides from us why those things happen is because he wants us not to understand. Why? Because if we understood, we wouldn't fight it as strongly. If we could understand why bad things happen, then we would say, okay, on some level it's justified. Maybe we would still battle the evil, but we would, somewhere in our minds, we'd be like, there's a reason for that. In the same way that pro-Palestinians today try to justify the events of October 7th. It's the occupation, it's this. They're trying to give reason, context. They'll always say, of course, we condemn, et cetera, but you have to understand and they'll say, it's an open air prison and this and that. They'll give all kinds of contextual points, so that the listener can can digest what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's what happens, right? When you give context, then the listener basically doesn't fight that evil, as much, doesn't want to fight that evil as much. That's what occurs. And so Rabbi Sachs and Rabinovich say Hashem didn't want to give context. He wanted to hide the context from bad things that happen so that we would fight those things all the way, that we would fight those things completely and absolutely, that we would battle evil in this world without giving a second thought. And I think that is a very important message for us, during this time. I know that when I was in the U.S. just a few weeks ago, so I was exposed much more to foreign media, and I can see the battle, raging, for the justification, of October 7th and what happened over there. And I think it's terrible, like the attempts, to do all that. But I think that what we need to do is have clarity with our moral compass. And once again, not to blame others. I always say not to blame others. It'll be the easiest thing, to just say, oh, okay, what happened October 7th? Hamas did it, and that's why. Of course, that's why. Of course, that's why. Of course, Hamas did it, and of course, it's their fault, and of course, 100%. And yet, with all that said, if we are looking to draw meaning from this event, the meaning that can be drawn is personal. A person can look at themselves and say, what is God trying to tell me? Not us, not why he did it. What is he trying to tell me? What can I do better with myself, with my surroundings? How can I contribute, et cetera? All these things to combat the evil with good. That at the end of the day is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is looking to tell us, each and every one in their own way, and to try and figure what that is. So I would say, and with this I'll finish my presentation, and I'm happy to open up for questions or comments. But I would say that it's I think that there's importance in not letting the events of October 7th simply become like another day of mourning. It's important for us to draw meaning from those events in some way, for us to think about what we can do as a result of those events. And we have been doing much, but there is still a lot for us to take in, to figure out. And I do my small part to try and help for that to happen. But like I said, there's a lot of big things, both halachically and philosophically, that I think we all have to contend with now and for the next months, years, who knows. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm happy to field any questions or comments that anyone might have.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Yoni. If anyone has a question, they're welcome to either put it in the chat or to unmute themselves and to ask. Go ahead.
I have a question, if I may.
Sure. Of course.
I'm Wendy Schwartz, and I live in West Rogers Park. Yasher Koach, Rav Yoni, we really appreciate all your chazuk. So I understand what you just said about how we're not supposed to understand, but I can't help but think about the individuals who have to endure the suffering and the tragedy. And what do we say to them? How do we comfort them? I mean, sometimes they're martyrs for Am Yisrael. Sometimes they're experiencing a personal crisis. And I understand that we need the passion to fuel our energy and our desire to create a world of tikkun olam. But how does that justify an individual or a family's life being ruined?
right?
Thank you, Wendy.
That's a great question. And I want to make clear that there's a difference in a Zoom call and a personal conversation, right? So obviously in personal conversation, you feel out the individual. And my first words out of my mouth are never, let me explain to you what we should take from this. Like obviously, you sympathize with the individual, you sit, you listen, et cetera, 100%. I agree with all that, and I'm not taking away from that. And once again, I don't think there's a justification. That word I wouldn't say. But nevertheless, to answer your question, okay, more specifically, look, I had two young men from my community were killed in the first few days. One of them, like Mamish on Simchas Torah, he was in Sayeret Matkal, very dear family, and he was killed right on the first day. And then a few days later, another one, also, and it's horrible. You go to the shivas and, it's horrible. But when I was at the Shiva, I realized something that was very impactful to me. Okay, and I'd like to share it with you. But I'll share with you first a different story, and then I'll go back to this. Okay, so I once heard Rabbi Lau, not David Lau, who's the chief rabbi right now, his father, Israel Meir Lau, who, as you know, went through the Holocaust, lost family in the Holocaust, and I once heard him on a radio interview, and they asked him, how can you believe in God after everything that you and your family went through? And I was impacted by his answer. He said, I know that if I could go back and ask my father before they waltzed him into the gas chamber, if I would ask him, Papa, what do you want from me? That he would tell me, I want you to live a religious life. I want you to be a good Jew. I want you to continue believing in God. I want you to do all those things. In other words, said Rabbi Lau, if I am to commemorate my parents, if I am to do what they wanted, if that's what matters to me, right, then I should think what they would say to me today and what they would want from me. That's what I should be thinking about. And I know what they would want. I know what they would say to me. So that's why I live my life that way. And when I went to the Shiva house of that family lost their child on the first day, and I heard the story, and I was talking to the uncle of the child who died, it struck me that there was such a disparity between what actually happened on some level on Simchas Torah and between what I felt when Simchas Torah ended and I saw the news. Because when we all, and I'm sure you had the same reaction that I did, when we all finished the Chag and we looked at the news, we were in shock. We were all in shock. And we said, wow, how could there be such a failure? How could there have been such a massive intelligence failure on the part of Israel? How could the generals have gotten it so wrong? And how could the politicians have gotten it so wrong? Et cetera, et cetera. That's how we all felt. We were shocked. We were shocked, by what was going on. And we were just taken aback by this colossal failure of everything. And that's still true. It's not that it's not true. There was a colossal failure. That's obviously correct. But at the same time, and I'm embarrassed. I felt when I was sitting at the Shiva house, I was embarrassed for myself that I didn't realize it the first moment that I saw the news. That at the very same time that there was a colossal failure, there was also colossal heroism. That these people, these few soldiers, right, that came down there, we know today there were 3,000 terrorists that came in. And these people, they went down there and they don't train for this. They don't train to be 1 against 10. They train to be in a unit, which is, 3 against 1, 4 against 1, 10 against 1. And they were doing the impossible things. They ran into the fire under impossible odds to save civilians. A failure, I think to categorize the first day as a failure is to do an injustice to those who fell. Yes, there was a failure of sorts. And on the other hand, there was an amazing success of morality, of heroism, of individuals who went in, risked their lives, and wanted to die for their country and for their people, and did everything they could to save people who were babies, people who who already, some people who were they were 80, 90 years old in a wheelchair, didn't even know what was going on, but whatever, they went in there to save them, to carry them on their backs and pull them out of the rooms and save everyone that they could. And to me, right, to look at, and once I was at the Shiva house, right, I realized that to look at the father of that soldier and to tell him, man, those people died for nothing, it was meaningless. That first day was meaningless. There's no, that's not right. It's just not a right thing to say. Of course there's a meaning to it. Meaning that if I could ask that soldier who died, if there was meaning to it, of course he would say yes. Right? If I think about the people who died, what they would say, right? They wouldn't say, or a lot of them wouldn't say, that it was meaningless. They would say that it was meaningful, that they died for their country, that they were proud of what they did, and therefore to search for meaning is something that the families need, not because they need it as like a band-aid solution. They need it in a deep way. They want to know what their loved ones would have thought. They want to connect to what their loved ones felt in those last moments. And I'm sure that their loved ones were deeply rooted and connected to this land, to this country, to what they believe in, and that is what should be, I don't know if to say the word celebrated, but it should be what is commemorated, what is understood, what is seen. For us, when we look at the number 1400 and we say senseless murder, and you're right, of course it's all those things. I'm not saying it's not those things, but if it's only those things, then we're missing something, because there's much more there, because these people did something that we cannot even believe that they did. The acts of heroism, of bravery, it's beyond imagining. So to boil it down to tzaddik verala, to boil it down to there's no explanation, is on some level doing an injustice to them, to the families, and to the fallen. So for me, there's a necessity, in moving past that, not because I want to move past that and because I want to give meaning, because they want to, because they see meaning. I get chizuk from the families. When I hear the families talking about their children and their brothers and sisters and parents, I get chizuk from that because they know who they were. They know who those people were. They were a world of ideals, of thoughts, of feelings, etc. And there's nothing senseless about that. There's nothing senseless about an individual, and in that sense, I feel like that's necessary. I'm sorry, I do need to go to another Zoom, so I do apologize that I need to get off. I see Rav Ari has left us, and I don't know who's in charge, so to speak. But I will say good night. Here it's nighttime, and thank you for listening. And yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi Yoni.
Thank you.
Thank you for your words of chazak.
Laila tov.
Laila tov.